Congratulations! You made the varsity, the podcast. My name is John Arand, and I am Puck's sports correspondent and the host of this pod. And today, we're going to run a conversation that I had last week with Don Garber. Don is the longtime commissioner of Major League Soccer. He's been in that role for nearly 27 years, since 1999. Well, Don and I spoke in College Park, Maryland on Wednesday night as part of the University of Maryland's 20th annual Povich Symposium, named after the famed sports writer Shirley Povich. Don and I spent a lot of time talking about MLS 3.0. That's the branding that the league has put on the next wave of growth. Well, MLS is ending its 30th season this weekend, but it still feels like a startup to me. We talk about that during our interview. I think you're going to like this one a lot. But before we get to Don Garber, today is Sunday, December 7th, and here's what I'm watching. And for me, it's all about Netflix's pursuit of Warner Brothers Discovery. As you know by now, Netflix has offered $72 billion for Warner Brothers Film Studio and the HBO Max streaming service. So what does that mean for sports? Really, not much. If the deal goes through, Warner Brothers Discovery is going to spin out its TV networks, TNT, TBS, True TV, into its own company. And those networks, combined with Discovery's international channels, are set up to operate on their own. Maybe somebody's going to swoop in and buy them. Maybe they'll continue to operate on their own. We don't know the answer to that yet. But I've talked to a bunch of people internally, and they're all moving forward with the belief that they're going to operate as their own company once the Netflix deal goes through. That means launching their own streaming service, something that's been in the works for a while. It also means TNT Sports and Bleacher Report are going to remain bidders for sports rights. So the main question now is how aggressive TNT Sports will be now that doesn't have the backing of Warner Brothers Discovery. Even as one big entity, WBD passed on NBA rights. It has a Major League Baseball deal that's coming up in a few years. It carries the MLB playoffs through the championship series. And it has a hockey deal with the NHL that is up after the 27-28 season. TNT Sports carries a Stanley Cup Finals in some years. So those are some big-time rights. And the question is whether TNT Sports is going to have the resources to renew those deals. Another question is whether MLB and the NHL will look to bigger companies with bigger footprints to carry their crown jewel rights. Then there's a question of Netflix, which has dabbled in sports. It doesn't appear that this deal is going to cause Netflix to alter that strategy one bit, which has really been to focus on one-off events that it can eventize. Sorry for the business jargon there. Netflix carries a couple of NFL games on Christmas. It's going to carry some baseball games next season. It has the rights to the 2027 Women's World Cup. Netflix is moving slow and methodically in the sports space, and buying a studio on HBO Max, well, that really shouldn't change that approach that much. But here's what I know. This is going to be a really fun story for me to cover over the next few months. But for right now, let's get to Major League Soccer Commissioner Don Garber. This is the capital of soccer right now. And this weekend, there's the World Cup draw in addition to Maryland playing. The international soccer community really has it's descended on DC. You're here, obviously. You have the MLS final coming up this weekend. Messi in Miami against Vancouver down in Miami. Are you able to tap in to the celebration that's going on right now, or is it just too much going on with the final coming up?
Well, first of all, let me start by thanking you, John, and thanking the university and the program. I knew George very well, and I remember when the center was formed, George, who was a soccer-friendly editor, there are a few of those, and he was the grandfather of Steve, who is really one of the great soccer journalists in our country. So I'm happy to be here, John. This is a big moment, and I think it's the beginning of capturing all the momentum and excitement of what global football, global soccer can be, and all the energy that's been going on at so many different levels, John. And we'll talk, I'm sure, a lot about the media part of it. But I've been doing this for a very long time. I like to say when I started, I'm not quite sure what I was thinking. I left a pretty good job, and MLS was pretty fledgling, and then it went down, a bit of a rabbit hole. for a couple of years. So I kind of look at these great moments as milestones for what everybody who cares about the game, John, has been dreaming of, which is establishing our country as a true soccer nation and having all of the pieces come together and harness the passion of fans and try to convince, as you can imagine, the political folks that are supporting both the World Cup, but building stadiums and creating green fields for people to play. And it's all capped off by what will start on Friday with the draw, thousands and thousands of people from around the world. Appropriately, our State of the League, 30th season, will happen on tomorrow night down in D.C., and there'll be hundreds and hundreds of media people there. The draw will be spectacular. They just announced the talent for that. And then we got a little game on Saturday, which I think will really capture a lot of attention and bring even more awareness to MLS.
So you know what I love about covering your league is you're wrapping up your 30th season. I mean, you've been around for a while, since for 30 years. I happen to cover like the NFL and MLB and the NBA. It feels like you're still a startup in some manner. Give me the state of your league. Like, how does it feel internally?
It is a startup, and it's rare. We're in a university setting, and people thinking about how are they going to build their future, and how's the center going to raise money to be able to expand, the outreach for all the great young minds that are being educated here. We're unusual. There are very few 30-year startups. And I've had a lot of conversations with our owners about that. I'm kind of like a VC CEO, but have been in the job way longer than most founders are. Generally, you're kicked out way earlier, and they bring in somebody that will be a proper CEO.
This curse is about being as well liked as you are.
Yeah,
I think.
or at least you got to keep the owners who hate you away from the ones who haven't really figured it out yet. And there are lots of them, so you just keep them in different rooms, and it's worked out. But John's very true, and I think we'll get into it when we talk about Apple. We'll get into it when we talk about building stadiums that had not been built before in this country, and thinking about MLS as a commercial driver to grow the sport that benefits all of the different soccer stakeholders. And it's very difficult to have to operate as if your next day is your first day, and to have people that have been in this job a long time. Most of our senior executives have been around since the league's founding. That's highly unusual. Hank Paulson's one of our owners, and he once said to me after a long board meeting, said, I hear you've been the commissioner for 10 years. I've sat on a lot of boards. That's my limit. When are you leaving? And that was 16 years ago. And I said, Hank, you'll go into the category for those guys who...
I don't want you to talk to that guy over there.
So I think it's a great question. People don't ask me that very often. I think it's motivating, it's exciting. It creates innovation because you don't get steeped in tradition. All that being said, the NFL goes from strength to strength. I spent almost 17 years there. It's amazing to me how a league that can be that mature, a business that could be that mature, continues to take risk and innovate, thinks about their business differently, getting investment at media partners as opposed to taking rights fees, and going about and coming up with stadium funding with their debt facility that nobody else had really thought of. So we can learn from the other leagues. John, you cover them all, and you've been around a long time. I like being a little engine that could, but being old enough to not have to worry about whether we're going to, be able to cover all of our obligations.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was leading into my next question about the NFL. Of course, continues to grow, as do all those other leagues. So with that knowledge, that of course you're always growing, where is MLS right now in terms of the state of its growth?
Way further along than we thought we would be, because you're still in a...
You would be in 1994, or then...
Well, again, it's appropriate for those who don't know, MLS was founded out of the 1994 World Cup. So we're going to talk a lot over the next weeks about, if not for the obligation that U.S. Soccer made to FIFA, there was no MLS when young guys, pre-Kobe and pre-Taylor, and maybe when, Sasha, you were thinking about being pro, the World Cup team in 1994, they were training in some facility in Southern California. They had no training grounds. They barely had uniforms. It's amazing that we did reasonably well. And here we are sitting here today with 30 teams and 26 stadiums and billions and billions and billions of dollars of investment in the league and obviously millions and millions of fans. John, the way I look at it is I think that it's a generational, the lifetime value of a fan, things that you all will be thinking about. What's the lifetime value of a consumer? We're now a business that's gone through its first generation, that have kids that have never grown up without MLS in their lives. So you have the ability for parents to take kids to games and see those kids wearing jersey, or a kid as we call them, and identifying with a player, going to a youth program, and having that DNA connectivity that drives and has driven the NHL and the NBA and MLS and MLB. And all of them, John, have gone through different phases of growth. I had lunch with Gary Bettman the other day, and I remember sitting in the offices of the Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. We were convincing MLSE to buy an MLS team. By the way, it was $10 million when they bought it in 2006-07. And the CEO said, I got to take a break because Gary Bettman's having a press conference. They're going to have a lockout. And Gary, over that period of time to where we are now, has built a great media property, a lot of great stadiums, teams that are now average value of $2 billion. So as we go through the ebbs and flows, I try to remind a new version of owners. The industrialists are leaving, and the new breed of owners, you write about them a lot, are coming in. Just, this is a long-term play. It's a generational play. Be patient, be bold, be courageous, be willing to invest a lot of money. Soccer is the growth sport in our country. I have no doubt about that.
In your first couple of answers, you shouted out Roger Goodell, you shouted out Gary Bettman. Soccer is unique, but how much do you lean on what these other leagues are doing to make decisions on MLS?
That's a good question,
Thank
John.
you. I do this for a living.
Yeah, man. Less than you think on some areas, but more than you would think on others. You know, clearly around COVID, about sports betting, what is happening, you might ask about that in prediction markets. You know, the NHL just did their deal, which kind of surprised us all, and that couldn't be more timely with everything Kaushi did over the last 24 hours. So I think, well, I like to say, well, if it's good enough for them, it ought to be good enough for us. They have much more congressional oversight. Baseball has its antitrust exemption. I like being sort of over here and not having the same level of scrutiny that we might have, you know, 20, 40, 50, or 100 years from now. But we do talk. We get together now and again. You know, Roger's at the head of the class, and regardless of how old he might be or how many years he's been in the job, and then it kind of goes downhill. But that being said, I'm the second longest serving commissioner after Gary, and that surprises me. When I came in, I was 40 years old-ish. I knew nothing about how to run a league, really. David Stern once took me and put his arm around me and say, hey, kid, just don't do what I say and don't talk a lot and you're going to be fine. And I used to talk to David a lot. He was an opinionated guy, and I respected.
I bet David had a few more four-letter words in there. Recently, I've been writing a lot and reading a lot about MLS 3.0, which seems to be coming from the league, about sort of getting ready for the next stage of growth. What does that look like?
You know, again, I'm going to bring it back to the other leagues. And I'm a fan of all sports, and I worked in one sport for a really long time. Think of how long it took for all of us who care about baseball to do the things that baseball did that have made the game way more fan-friendly for a whole new generation of fans that have kind of grown up with the game a bit. Maybe they weren't following it as much. Their parents weren't, you know, they weren't playing Little League, et cetera, et cetera. The other leagues don't innovate that much because they're so mature, John. You know, the NBA has their season tournament. We launched the Leagues Cup. We play an in-season tournament against the Mexican League, and we do it in the middle of our season. We're constantly innovating as a business. A, we can. B, we have to, because we're competing, unlike almost all of them, in a global market where the rest of the football world is very established. They are the NFL, if you will, of the sporting world. So we constantly have to take a sit back, work a lot on strategy, have the right planning in place, sit down and have strategy groups with our owners, all who are best in class and have run complicated businesses, and they're very engaged in MLS. 3.0 is just the next iteration of where we need to be. We need to get closer to the international standard. Changing our calendar is a massive undertaking. We have 10 teams in the northern part of North America. We've got teams in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal and Chicago and Minnesota. We're going to be playing games there in February. So imagine what those owners are thinking about what that's going to be like, and then having to go and figure out why that makes sense, aligning with the international standard. We have 3 new stadiums coming on in Chicago, Miami in March, and New York City. If you haven't seen that, we'll have a stadium next door to Citi Field, billion-dollar project, so that'll be our 29th stadium. And all these things will position us post-World Cup to, ride a little bit of that momentum, get a little rocket fuel, and then hopefully build MLS. And the tailwinds of that will affect college soccer and hopefully lift up the women's game even more. And that game continues to grow. The league's doing really well. If you believe in the globalization and where demographics are shifting in our country, regardless of politics, soccer is moving in the right direction. And that's why our teams are valued at over $20 billion or $21 billion collectively.
You referenced the calendar shift. Have you ever been in Minnesota in February? I was there for the Super Bowl. That was the coldest I've ever been.
I was too, and I, in a previous life, the commissioner said, and I was an event guy, we're going to have a cold weather Super Bowl, and we have this thousands and thousands of fans going to be hanging out outside the stadium, and I was the guy that came up with the idea for the NFL Experience, which we did indoors for the first year in Minnesota as a way to kind of have a little bit of a theme park because you had all those people out in the cold. By the way, our first game in Minnesota, when they came into our league several years ago, was played in snow. It was pretty cool, and Atlanta played Minnesota. The fans were throwing snowballs. You know, have to be thoughtful. Our fields are going to have to be heated. We're going to have to deal with a whole bunch of schedule shifts. We've got now 30 teams. We can play a lot of the early games in the South. We have 3 teams in Texas and several in Florida and Charlotte and the like. So we'll figure it out.
Does August in Austin equate February in?
I love this guy. So John, you know, when
Say that again. Can we clip that?
Minnesota, Chicago, and Toronto, and those guys, I'm saying, like, have you been to a game in Miami in August? So when I just another fun story, we have this Dos a Cero thing we do many years ago. We never beat Mexico, and our national team, we used to take them to Columbus, and in February. And we thought that would be a really good idea because all these folks who are used to playing in warm weather would come up and it would be like 20 degrees and they'd be wearing gloves and long pants and all that stuff, and it would work really, really well. And those games were really cold, and I'd say, man, why do they do that? It's really cold in February in Columbus, let alone in Toronto. But, you know, ask Messi what it's like to play from Barcelona and play in August in Dallas or in Houston. Those are stadiums that are not, you know, dome stadiums. So you just got to manage it. Running a sports league is really hard, and you just got to keep your eye on the ball. You got to get focused. You got to get your owners together. You got to make tough decisions. You got to have capital that is long. And so far, you know, it's working pretty well.
So take us into the owners' meetings. Is this something that you were pushing for? Is this something that you sense that the majority of owners
on the calendar change?
On the calendar change, yeah.
We should have like a roadshow, John. You know, that process was the most difficult process that I think that we had as a league in our history, because it was complicated and it affected revenue. You know, how's a season ticket holder going to? Will they buy season tickets if they might not want to go in the winter? What's your player strategy if you're going to have to play in Minnesota versus playing in Atlanta? What do you do with your sponsors? We had a summer competition less in the summer, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll get to media, John. We're also playing our playoffs up against the SEC championship. We had our playoff game up against the Duke game the other day. We can't compete in this time of the year against all of the major leagues and intend to be able to be successful with the postseason. At the end of the day, it's a media business, number one, and we've got to fix that. And also, we're aligned with the international calendar to buy and sell players. You know, we sold $200 million worth of players this year. And we do that with calendars that, windows that aren't aligned with the rest of the world. We're selling players in the middle of our playoffs. It makes no sense. We had our group work and create pods with our owners. We hired a consulting group out of the UK that talking about data, did tons of data analytics and weather analytics and how do we work with the algorithm on the schedule if we had to move games. It took us a year, literally a year, to create all of the work through owner groups with chief soccer officers and with our chief business officers. The first vote, I kind of knew I had the vote, but I know Steve's here, there are probably not that many other media people here. We didn't announce it because we wanted to be sure, we wanted to get it pretty close to unanimous, and it was. And they're great partners, they're partners in the boardroom and they're fierce competitors on the field, and we just laid out why this made sense, and hopefully it works. And if it doesn't, MLS 4.0.
Sooner than we think. You mentioned that this is a media business. It's good to get into my sort of pet project. You're going to stop saying I'm asking good questions now that I'm bringing up Apple, I think.
Oh, you know what? I do this a lot, John, and most of the time the questions aren't great. So.
You just redid your deal with Apple. It's going to end now 3 years earlier. It was, in my opinion, a great deal that you struck because it comes in front of the paywall. Everything comes in front of the paywall. Why did you do that?
Well, for those in the room, I told John we were going to have fun. You probably weren't the biggest fan of the deal when we announced it, and we respected that. It's part of why we recognized when you do bold things that anticipate the future, you got to break some glass. And those that are traditional thinkers, and I'm not saying you are, but the industry didn't quite understand what we were trying to achieve. So let me go to that. And I'm going to bring it back to Puck as a subscriber and an avid reader. Where was Puck? Where were you 4 years ago? We were consuming all of the things that matter to us in the industry. Maybe when we got Vanity Fair online, before that, we needed to read it on a regular basis in a magazine. There were things that were popping up, and now we have, for those in the entertainment, media, and sports industry, a must-read newsletter that gives us information that we weren't getting in a way that matters to us. I feel the same way about what was going on with broadcast media, John. Nobody talks about the fact that all of the major leagues have the 5 major leagues. There are many other leagues, and the NWSL, I think, is a major league. But I think what differentiates the major leagues is local broadcasts. Every single game was broadcast. So when you're in DC, it was on the regional. When you're in Vancouver, it was on the local TSN affiliate, TSN 7 or whatever it might be. Every single game. We have 600 games. 500 of them were local. And we saw 4 or 5 years ago what is happening now. I just saw your podcast, which we listened to on the train, what's happening to the RSNs. And we saw
Nothing good.
Nothing good. But John, we saw that. And we needed to not just renew 100 games. We had 30 with ESPN, 30 with Univision, and we had 30 with Fox. We had some international distribution that we pieced together. But we had 500 games that were not going to continue. We certainly weren't going to get paid. We wanted to aggregate all that into a global package that anybody, anywhere, without blackouts, can go with the touch of a button and capture the excitement of Major League Soccer. What was criticized was you're walking away from the ubiquity of having a Red Bull game that was on MSG. Maybe 20,000 people were watching that game on a good day. So what we were looking to do is have a Red Bull New York City game be treated as if it was on ESPN, no differently than Columbus, Cincinnati, or San Jose playing LA. Every single game is available the exact same way, same number of cameras. People like Taylor and other great broadcasters are broadcasting those games and aggregating it in what Apple, Eddie Q, who you know well, believed would be the ultimate disruption of the sports media business, which was direct-to-consumer global subscription service. And we believed it. Ultimately, they were not able to achieve that with other leagues because it requires exclusivity. If you know that you can get something from anywhere for free, not free, cable subscription, satellite subscription, a streaming subscription, then ultimately that would inhibit your ability to sell the subscription. Moving to Apple TV takes us from what is 1.3, 1.4-ish subscribers to an audience of what could be, they don't announce that number, but it's really, really big. It's tens and tens and tens and tens of millions of people. So eliminating that paywall, which changed our deal, gives us the ability to have our games broadcast globally, again through a streaming service, doing linear where we think it makes sense, John. So it's a good deal for us. It's a good deal for Apple. The shortened deal makes sense for us. We had a deal, as I talked about publicly, that was a revenue share. That's gone away, so we gave something up. We're going to get something back, a shorter deal. I am super bullish about what our media opportunity is, and I'm really bullish that all the disruption, all of the transformation of what's going on in the media space will settle in, as it always had. When radio was broadcasting horse racing, and then the beginnings of baseball, and then the NFL on Monday Night Football, and then the advent of cable and satellite and red zone and all of that, it always disrupts, but it always settles down, and live sports is always a winner.
In about 5 minutes, we're going to go to questions from the audience. So think of your questions. When you have one, raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone over to you.
John, do you agree with that? Because I want to know what you're going to write about what I said.
Well, here's what. There are two things on that worry me for the league a little bit. One is, by going to a streaming service as early as you did, you cut off a lot of casual fans that were maybe watching the college basketball game and then sticking through to watching MLS. Or I'm thinking more of the national, Fox and ESPN. And even today, still broadcast TV and cable TV still provide, at least in the U.S., more viewers. And then secondly, when you did the deal, I would have expected Apple to have a sports strategy that would have supported a lot of your games. And until they did the F1 deal, I felt like you were sort of like out there alone, which would have frustrated me.
Yeah, I won't comment on that because I know this is a public forum. but I understand how, if you were me, you would have been frustrated by that. So John, I guess, and this is super important, our attendance has grown every year we had the Apple deal. Our revenues have grown every year we've had the Apple deal. Our ratings this year finally have released them yesterday or the day before, up 29% season long. We had 700,000 people watching our playoffs on average. Our 3.7 weekly, remember, you all know this, there isn't a normal rating service for what we're doing because we're the only one doing it. The only thing we could do is take our audience for the week of 12 games that we have and put them together, unlike the one basketball game or one baseball game or an All-Star game or a World Series. We're putting on 600 games, and all those games are treated exactly the same. But our revenues have grown, our team values have grown, our audience has grown, our attendance has grown, our expansion interest has grown. So the real question is, when the vast majority of young people, and this is our audience, are watching streaming services, as you've said, by far, way more than they're watching linear, because they're cable nevers. We're speaking to the audience that are not being lost because they may or may not be watching network television because they don't have the ability to get it. I would rather go to YouTube, and you talked a lot about that, or Julie talked a lot about that. All of the things that are happening with these new services, as streaming services are becoming the linear and broadcast services of the past, it's changing, and we are right in the middle of all of that in ways that have been good for us, albeit way different, and certainly criticized, but we got thick skin in the soccer business, guys.
You do have thick skin, and Dan Cornerbonch, the master. I should know this off the top of my head. 3 years, is that when your media rights are up?
Yeah,
okay.
2.5 years. Yeah, it's complicated because it's halfway through our new sprint season, but yes, and I'm bullish on Apple. I think they'll be there, and I think this new strategy they have with F1 and baseball is going to be great for them.
As you look at the media market now, when your rights do come up, how do you see the market, especially vis-a-vis your league?
So back when we looked at the renewal of our rights, we had a 3-year runway of taking back all of our local rights from the clubs and putting it into a bundle. Then we had 18 months to go out to the market. Sitting here today, and we knew that the RSN disruption was happening, John. We knew it, and it turned out to be true. I can't tell you what the media business is going to look like 3 years from now. I don't think we're going to follow people like you, honestly, and others that are looking at and talking to and speaking to those that are the folks that are making these decisions. But I don't know where we're going to be. It could be that the broadcast networks are more consolidation. You've talked about what's going on with WBD and having that potentially bought by a streamer. So maybe the market is going to look so different from where we are today. But I'm happy I'll be back in the market earlier.
We are ready for some questions. I'm going to lob one last one. I can't believe I've had you up here for about a half hour. I think I mentioned Messi once. How big has Messi been for the league?
It's been fun, John. I'll tell you, there's been a guy from the New York Times is writing a book about it. He is a unicorn. He is truly a unicorn. I could say this not as the commissioner, but really as a fan. He enjoys playing the game for the right reasons, which the legendary athletes do. He's happy. His family's happy. He won't come out of a game. I'm sitting with our guys. We have a little chat thing on Saturday nights. You're not on it, Taylor, but every once in a while, I'll zip him a note saying, "What did you just say? Are you kidding me? I'm going to have to talk to you on Monday." But, he won't come out of a game, John. So if you're 38 years old and you've got World Cup qualifying and you've got the Leagues Cup and you've got the Champions League and they're winning 4-0, I know I was a coach, I'd say, Lee, why don't you just take a little break and, maybe have a Celsius or one of our great sponsors, but he won't come out, John. So that speaks to that Michael thing. It takes 10,000 reps to be able to be the great one. He loves being here in America. He loves our league. We're going to have a big event with him on Saturday. I'm just overjoyed watching him. It's a thrill to see history happen and live it. I try to remind the people who are working is that what's it like working in a league? You got to do it every day. It's not so much fun all the time. You've got a lot of things and fires that you got to put out. But we got to take a step back and think that we're living in a world where in our league, in Major League Soccer, this guy decided to come to America. He decided to come to our league. We didn't have to go chase him. He decided to come, and he loves it. And he brought a couple of his friends. That worked out okay. And, they're going to build a new stadium, and that stadium is going to be spectacular. I don't know. I'm sure that would have happened without Leo, but, it's been very, very, very special. I'm happy for everybody. If you love the game, the guy is truly a unicorn, and I'm happy to have him.
My name is Rui Ferreira Nagy. I'm play for Bethesda Soccer Club, U17, and I had a question. I was wondering, as a player, that's why I've interested in this question. How come the level is so much more advanced in Europe compared to the level of academies in the MLS Next? Because I've seen a lot of times, like individual games, American academies are able to compete with the European academies and win games. But then in the end, in the high ranks of football, Premier League, Serie A, different leagues, you don't see many Americans, even though in individual games, they are able to compete at that level. And I was just wondering, why is it that way on the developmental side?
I think it's a great question. Our U17s got further than they have, and then they didn't get any further, and that's been frustrating. It happens with our Olympic team. We get to a certain point where we can compete against some countries, but not the best countries when it comes to elite player competitions. MLS invests over $100 million a year in our academy system in MLS Next and MLS Next Pro. So I'll talk about this in my State of the League on Thursday in DC. That was zero 5 years ago. So our academies are able to compete with the best academies around the world. Messi is going to have 6 academies come. We're going to announce that next week from the best clubs in the world. The Inter Miami Academy will be able to stand toe-to-toe with Real Madrid or at the U14 or U15 level. It's what happens next. And that is where MLS in its youth has not been able to be competitive yet with the rest of the world. But don't count America out. We will invest what we need to invest. Young people like you are going to see what it's like to be a young professional. We're signing young players on the men's and the women's side who are competing in a professional environment that we didn't have in the past. We have 30 player development facilities. Some of them are among the best in the world. Those facilities didn't exist 10 years ago, so you can't create the success without creating the foundation. And that's what I think a problem with sport. Everybody expects you just got to come here and win a Super Bowl. It happens down here. Sasho knows that. Every day humping it and working hard and doing what you need to do. And that's what we'll do with MLS next. I'm confident that we'll get better. And I hope I'm around to see that happen.
My name is Nolan. I am a sophomore here at the Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. And my question sort of ties back to the foundation of MLS. I know in the statement regarding the calendar, MLS spoke about the desire to sort of blend the global game with North American tradition. There are other aspects of MLS, some that we see from the outside, such as the playoffs or the lack of promotion relegation, and some more internal, such as the shared ownership stakeholder style that MLS has, and the salary cap, the designated player system, that have really made MLS stand out on the world stage. How do you feel that structurally you are able to balance the foundations of what the league has been with potentially changing some of these very MLS procedures in a way that would further align yourself with the European leagues or other major soccer?
Am I allowed to say that was a good question?
Yeah, go ahead. Not quite as good, though, right?
Yeah, no, you have it, buddy. You really do. There are a lot of things that go into being the North American version of the global game. And the global game started, there are great movies about this, in the grassroots and companies in England that, coal miners, and they started playing football, and it grows up, and then they eventually established the Premier League, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at the economics of global football, it's not nearly as stable as the economics in Major League Soccer. 19 of the top, I get this right, 19 of the top 50 most valuable teams in the world are MLS teams. And there's a reason for that. Good governance, owners who are partners, a focus on investment in infrastructure. I had a number of friends that invested in Roma, a very famous bunch of guys that many of them now have come in to invest in Major League Soccer. And I joked with them one day, I said, the last stadium that was built in Rome was the Colosseum. And we're putting up 3 stadiums in the next 3 years for several $1 billion in investment because of the way we operate our system. So promotion relegation is fun and it's sexy, and there's another league, minor league, that's creating a promotion and relegation system. All leagues have debt, all local teams have debt. If you don't have debt, you can't run a business. And we're trying to invest in better player development, better youth development, better facilities, and on and on and on. You can't do that without having public-private partnerships, banking facilities. Now, how would you guarantee that if one day your team is really not performing well and playing in a lower division that today can't support that? I remember saying famously many years ago on Men in Blazers, imagine if, New York was relegated and had to play against a certain city, and it turned out that city had a great lower division team, and the mayor called me out in the newspaper, and I had to call him up and apologize publicly on radio. So I'm not going to diminish what could happen in the future. Maybe there's a time when the whole ecosystem works where that can make sense, but it has to make sense. I'm constantly confronted with teams that are underwater in Europe. The best top teams are underwater. They're getting their points taken away because they're not satisfying their obligations to creditors. Now, that's not happening in pro sports in North America, which is why Phil Anschutz and Kraft and the great new investors that have come into MLS, and some of them are the best and brightest minds in business, because it's a long-term investment, or else nobody's going to invest long-term. Just won't happen.
That's such an interesting answer to me, because you mentioned the top teams. It has little to do with promotion relegation, because some of the top teams are not going to be relegated.
Right, and they've been talking about a system where they'll never get relegated, right? So from strength to strength. So I'm a big fan. I love the idea of playoffs. We all live here. Playoffs matter. Playoffs drive. We had a 30% lift over our regular season in playoffs. That's because that's the way the North American fan is conditioned. maybe that changes. And if it changes, MLS is nimble enough to change. That's one thing that I've reminded everybody. The worst thing that you could happen is get stuck in the ideas that you had in the past, and you've got to get focused on making the decisions, risky decisions at times, and be able to have the courage to change. If not, you'll fail.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Hello, Commissioner. Again, thank you very much for being here. My name's Jack Suzanne, and I just graduated from here in May. Live in Philadelphia now. My question is about Sum, and Sum and U.S. Soccer ended their commercial rights partnership back in 2022. However, in joint statements, both parties said that the relationship would, quote, continue to be a priority. What does that relationship look like now, and what is Sum doing for this next summer to prepare for that?
So this a little bit inside soccer, right? Soccer United Marketing is a marketing company that we created many, many years ago, and it's a good thing almost to end on, John. You know, I'm gonna talk on Thursday about the difference between where soccer in America is today versus where it was in '94. There was no commercial market for soccer in America. FIFA could not sell the English language World Cup rights for the 2002 and 2006 World Cups. Korea, Japan, and Germany, it wouldn't have been on television. So we're a bunch of smart young folks, and we said, we'll buy them. And we went out, and I went to our owners and said, this is a little crazy, but let's go to FIFA, we'll buy those rights, we'll put them in a company, and we'll monetize those rights. And that's when John Skipper started at ESPN. John was a big fan, and I had met him at a restaurant and said, John, I got good news for you. You're a soccer fan. The better news is you can buy the World Cup. But by the way, you got to buy MLS, and you got to buy U.S. Soccer. And that company then had to hire people. We sold the ads. We sold sponsorships around it. It created a relationship with us with FIFA. It was highly capitalized. It still remains a profitable company. And rather than having 20 different properties, all who had no commercial intellectual property value, we rolled them up like a traditional roll-up. And then as those companies get more successful, have the capacity to hire their own people, like U.S. Soccer has done, they then can stand on their own. And we have evolved that, no different than IMG has evolved that. You don't have representation agreements forever. You create a market, and then that market basically is handed over to the shareholders, and they can go do their thing. The good news is the United States is the single most important and valuable commercial soccer market in the entire world. That's why Gianni moved here. That's why the World Cup is here. That's why the Club World Cup is here. That's why we have $21 billion in team values, and that was created from scratch. So the U.S. Soccer thing to me is great. I've been on their board for 26 years. So I'm a big fan of the national team, and it's part of my red, white, and blue blood. But the representation agreement is over, and they couldn't be doing a better job. They hired good people. Their head of commercials used to run commercial for MLS. So it's a win-win for everybody.
That was really great. I really enjoyed that a lot. So I want to thank Don Garber for taking the time to join me this week. Thanks also to Dan Cordemange for all his help in making this happen. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my friend Mark Hyman. Mark is the director of Maryland's Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism, and he's the person who set up last week's event. Thanks, Mark, and go Terps. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for listening to The Varsity, an Odyssey podcast in partnership with Puck. I also want to thank out the executive editors at Puck. That's Gabi Grossman, Ben Landy, John Kelly, the great team at Odyssey, Bob Tabador and Patrick Antonetti, and our new partners now at Nesson, Greg Poth and Mark Merlaka. If you like this podcast, make sure to sign up for my newsletter, also called The Varsity. Head over to puck.news and use the code word TheVarsity, all one word, for a 20% discount. And I will see you on Wednesday.